Your phone's on silent, and with that, we'll get to Gary Barta. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks everybody for coming today on short notice. It is both an exciting and historic day for Iowa athletics as we announce the addition of women's wrestling to our sports lineup. I think everybody here is fully aware of our history and tradition on the men's side. It's part of the fabric of Iowa. It's part of the University of Iowa's DNA when you look back historically at conference championships and national championships and Olympic gold medals and everything from Gable to Brands and anything in between. What you may not be as familiar with is the explosive emergence of women and girls wrestling not only across the country but also throughout our state. So I'll share a little bit with you about what's going on there. And again, some of this, for those of you who are close to it, might know more about it. But certainly the most recent big news was the Olympic gold medal that Tamara Mensah-Stock earned. That was exciting. There are now 45 NCAA Division I, II, and III wrestling programs in the country, and almost 100 if you include junior colleges and NAIA. So that's what's happening at the collegiate level. And in 2020, the NCAA gave the designation to women's sport as an emerging sport, which means that it is now has momentum. It's gaining in terms of program sponsorship, and it's something that the NCAA is behind. And then in the high school level, there are 32 states who have sanctioned girls' high school championships. In the state of Iowa, the Iowa High School Coaches Association sponsors the championship, and I know that our friend Josh Schomburger is here, and the Coralville community hosts that annual event. Last year, more than 600 girls in the state of Iowa participated in high school wrestling. And then members of our Hawkeye Wrestling Club, we started sponsoring women in our Hawkeye Wrestling Club in 2017. And I mentioned Josh Schomburger. He and his team and the community have hosted numerous Olympic trials for men and women, and then, as I mentioned, the high school championship. Our decision to add women's wrestling is historic and exciting for a lot of reasons, but also we are the first Power 5 institution to add women's wrestling. We're going to begin the search for a new, here's sort of the process. We're going to begin the search for a new head coach this fall, so basically immediately. Then after we have that coach in place, we'll begin the recruiting process in addition to getting the staff all put together. And then we'll have student athletes on our campus as early as next year with our first year of competition in the 23-24 season. You'll hear from Tom in just a minute. I would be a fool not to tap into the expertise, the reputation, the understanding of the sport to not have Tom Brands directly involved in this process. And of course, I will have him involved. Everything from finding, identifying, hiring the new coach, getting our program up and running. But once it is up and running, he and I both agree that it will be a self-sustaining entity. It will be, when I mean self-sustaining, I mean it will be on its own, standing alone on its own merits. So before I get into a few more other things, I do want to, I mentioned Josh, and Josh, thank you for, man, we've been together on a lot of wrestling events in this community, and the community has embraced them. Nationally, we have great support from the National Wrestling Coaches Association, Mike Moyer and his group. Terry Steiner, for those of you who follow wrestling, that's a familiar name because of his wrestling at the University of Iowa, but now currently he is the head coach of the U.S. women's national team. So just great support, and then the support that we've been receiving from the wrestling community. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. Before I open it up for questions, I want to answer a fair question and an obvious one. So first, the why women's wrestling, I've just explained to you why, and I think that probably makes a lot of sense at the University of Iowa. The why now is a question that many of you have, and that's a fair question. Let me give you some context into that before I go into detail. As I describe why now. Before COVID, we had been watching the explosive growth of girls and women's wrestling, and we had been keeping an eye on it. And frankly, Tom was in my ear 3, 4, 5 years ago saying, "Come on, boss, let's go. Let's get women's wrestling added." We were not ready to do that yet, but we were watching it. The other trend we were watching, and I just got back from a national meeting last night, but the other trend we were watching 3, 4, 5 years ago, and that was the trend where more women are going to college than men. That's a national trend, and we were seeing it on our own campus. So, as those two things are coming, I was going to throw in. So, as that was going on, in fact, our thoughts about women's wrestling, many of you know, I think most of you know, we've also been planning for and designing a new wrestling training facility. And the support from our alums on that has been amazing. And we'll go forward to the Board of Regents, and upon their approval, sometime this winter, our plan is to start construction this spring, early summer, on that new wrestling training facility. When we started designing that, probably about 2 years ago, we intentionally were including women's facilities in that training center with the anticipation that at some point we might add that sport. We always have been committed to Title IX. We continue to be committed to Title IX, and as we were looking ahead at those two trends, the emergence of women's wrestling and the growing trend of more women enrolling in college, this looked like at that time, again pre-COVID, like this was something that we would be doing at some time in the future. And if you think about it, men's basketball and women's basketball complement each other. Baseball and softball complement each other. And at the University of Iowa, men's wrestling and women's wrestling are going to complement each other. And then along comes the pandemic. And at that time, we halted all conversations about adding women's wrestling. And we went into crisis mode. And I'm not going to go through the process. You all have heard me talk about it. But the crisis mode included cutting salaries, cutting operating budgets, cutting positions, and then ultimately having to cut some sports. And then we had to borrow $50 million from the university to make up for that. So that all happens. And then in the fall of 2020, a Title IX lawsuit was filed against us, and we began the process of defending against those claims. Now, prior to discontinuing the sports, this is something, when it comes to Title IX, we've been employing and engaging with experts all along the way. Many of you might recall that we had the OCR, the Office of Civil Rights, was on our campus for about 4 years. Their findings were non-conclusive. They didn't find anything where we were in violation. As we were considering cutting sports, we brought in a Title IX expert. And that expert confirmed we were in compliance with Title IX before we made the decision to cut the sports, and that Title IX expert confirmed that with the sports that we were cutting, that we would be in compliance with Title IX. Then along the process, we reinstated women's swimming permanently. We hired a new head coach, Nathan Munt, who's doing a terrific job in running our women's swimming program and bringing that program back up. And then finally, as part of the Title IX lawsuit settlement, we agreed to add a women's sport. And our decision was to add the sport of women's wrestling. Again, at the University of Iowa, we believe that sport makes the most sense in terms of adding. So again, always committed to Title IX, always will be, always have been. But now I'll just tell you, and this is the bottom line. Were it not for COVID, we wouldn't have cut sports. Were it not for the Title IX lawsuit, I wasn't ready to add women's wrestling yet. But I can tell you that while the timing may be challenging, the decision is awesome. We're excited about it, and we're ready to go forward. Before I get any questions, I recognized a few external people, but I also want to tell you that over the last year and a half or so, or a little over a year, there's been people on our staff who've worked tirelessly in getting to this point. Barbara Burke, our Deputy Director of Athletics, who does many things. She's the Chief Operating Officer to the department, but she also directly oversees wrestling and Tom Brands. That's quite a job for those of you who know Tom. I say that with a smile on my face. Also, Senior Associate Athletic Director Lila Clary, who works on many things in our department, but she's been directly involved in all of our Title IX reviews, working with our experts, and so I'm grateful for Lila and the work she does. Matt Henderson, our senior staff, everybody on our staff, and then certainly central administration, and then finally, our head coach, Tom Brandt. As I mentioned, he's been in my ear now for a couple of years saying, boss, when are you going to add women's wrestling? We need to do this. We started sponsoring women in the Hawkeye Wrestling Club several years ago. He's been an advocate for a long time. He certainly is an expert in the sport. And I'm going to have Tom come up a little bit and talk about, from his perspective, Tom, this is your cue to get up off your chair. From his perspective, why this is important to our program, why this is important to the sport of wrestling. And after Tom is done, I'll come back up, and then you all can ask questions of me, and then certainly if you have any more technical questions on wrestling of Tom. So, Tom?
Awesome. Barbara Burke was mentioned, and she has to be mentioned again. What a catalyst and what a boss. So I've had some great bosses in my career, and she tops them all. And I've told all the other ones that as well. And not just because the relationship is strong, but because of the forward thinking, the problem-solving ability, and also impact. She shares vision for things that are impactful. And you talk about impact, you have an unbelievably historic, exciting announcement that University of Iowa is adding women's wrestling to its intercollegiate program. There's nothing more impactful than that, or exciting. There's certain things that you have to slow down when you're at the podium here to make sure you get it in so you represent it right. Our guys are here. We got 6 out of 10 returning All-Americans here. A couple of them said they had to go to classes. So, I mean, that's support right there. Not scripted. There's other things that you got to slow down and you got to acknowledge as well. Women's wrestling is awesome. It's great for the women. There's little girls all across the country and the planet that are going to see this. It's that impactful. But let me tell you something about how it impacts the men. It makes the men's program stronger. Women's wrestling, from its inception, has always made men's wrestling better. It always has. And there is a correlation there, and that's documented. That's documented. There's high-powered organizations out there. Emerging Sports Status was mentioned. The Committee on Women's Athletics and the NCAA. There's well-positioned, powerful, organized people there. Kyra Berry, Lori Ayers. And then Sally Roberts at Wrestle Like a Girl. And if you're in the women's wrestling world or you're a women's wrestling fan, then you know these names. And you know that we have solid leadership there. And it has to be said. I'm going to go to my notes now. All that being said, we will not change how we run our program. Our program will be run the same. The women will have their own practice times. The women will have their own head coach. The women will have their own structure. The women will run their program as they see fit. We will hire a coach. It will be the best coach in America. And look out, because when these steps start being taken, we're at the first step here, but you look down the natural next steps, and that next step is the coach we hire. It's going to be their program. And the stakes are high for the new coach. The stakes are high for the new coach. We're going to wrestle the best competition in the United States, the best collegiate competition in the United States. We're going to recruit unbelievable young talent that is already winning age group international championships and medals at the cadet and junior level. That's going to be our recruiting pool. Being the first is huge. Being the first is impactful. So that's where we're at. Last thing I'll say, doesn't just make the men better, like that's a big deal to us, but I'll tell you what, it makes the entire athletic department at the University of Iowa better. Awesome. Thanks.
You can see why the excitement of this day has been building for a while, but having this guy by our side is, I can't wait. I can't wait. With that, be happy to open it for questions.
Gary, as you may or may not know, when wrestling suffered in the 80s, they had blamed Title IX women's sports. Is it ironic that women's sports is now helping men's sports grow and wrestling grow?
I don't know about irony. What's exciting to me is what you just heard Tom Brandt say, and that is we're not talking about cutting wrestling programs. We're talking about adding women's programs. And what's exciting to me is that 600 girls in the state of Iowa participated in high school wrestling. And what's exciting to me is we won an Olympic gold medal in women's wrestling. So I don't know about irony, but the excitement of taking those two, men's and women's wrestling, and having them complement each other is just terrific.
Also, you did not want to do this by yourself. If you talk to any other Power 5 programs, especially within the Big Ten, will they be following suit?
I can't predict. I have had conversations across the country as I've been watching this build. I can't predict if others will. I certainly hope so. I anticipate that it could happen, but I don't have any predictions today.
How much will it cost startup-wise, and then annually do you expect for their budget?
Well, so I'll get to the answer in a roundabout way to say that, because there's not an existing Division I program, some of that's going to be based upon our experience on the men's side. To get started in year one, we'll have the cost of the coach's salary, and then begin the recruiting process year two. That'll include probably some assistant coaches and some scholarships. The sport of women's wrestling allows for 10 scholarships. And then, of course, our operating, our travel, somewhere in the vicinity, probably in that year three of $500,000 is what we're anticipating. And fortunately, we have a big head start with support we've received that will take care of all of those first 3 years and probably more than that. And certainly we're going to keep raising money. And as it comes to fundraising, as I mentioned, the incredible support we received in raising money for the building. We've received already over $20 million for the building that Tom came to me a few years ago and said, we need to have the best wrestling training center in the world. Not in Iowa, not in the country, but in the world. And so our donors have been amazing, absolutely amazing. We're actually, thanks to Kevin Collins and his team and Tom and all the hard work and our donors, this is the first project I've ever been involved with where the donors have put up the money and we're having to, architects have to catch up in designing the facility because the money came first. That's the kind of support that's amazing. And as I mentioned, even going back a couple of years ago, we had included the women's facilities in that training center so that in anticipation of someday getting to this point.
Of the agreement on the settlement terms, can you, beyond adding women's wrestling, is there more to it? Anything you can discuss?
The agreement is done. It's still being finalized. The paperwork's still being finalized. But in general, I mentioned it was about Title IX, and specifically it was about adding women's sports or the counting of women's sports. And so we had already agreed to reinstate women's swimming permanently, And part of the agreement was to add an additional women's sport. We chose women's wrestling for all the obvious reasons. Beyond that, it's really just continuing to monitor and make sure we're in compliance with Title IX, which we would always do even without an agreement, but that's the gist of it, Mike.
I think it was in this room last year, but it was suggested that a lot of Power 5 schools around the country would be dropping sports. Iowa's one of, to my knowledge, just a very few that did. Why here?
Well, I can't speak for other schools. I can tell you that faced with a $50 million deficit at the time, potentially as high as $75 million, that's what we believed we needed to do. I'm expected to be self-sustaining, and it was our decision collectively, and certainly mine from a responsibility standpoint, to set the course for how we were going to manage that crisis and that deficit. And the decision we came to was to eliminate those sports. Yes.
I know Tom just talked about how the women's coach will be the best in the country. Where do you guys go about trying to, what places are you looking for to find that person?
Well, the great thing about being in the Big Ten, being a national program, it'll be a national search. So we don't have any preconceived candidates that have already been selected, but we're aware of a lot of very qualified candidates. So it'll be a national search.
Considering Iowa's history in this sport, do you lean on Tom for his advice on hiring a coach, and will it be in a similar style to what Iowa likes to wrestle?
Well, I'd be a fool not to rely on Tom's expertise as we go out and search for a new head coach. So yes, he'll be directly involved. Barbara Burke is the head of that oversees the sport administratively, and myself will all be included. And the last part of your question, I don't know exactly how to answer it other than we're going to go find the best coach. And as Tom said, we want to win. We want to win championships. So we're going to look for the coach we think that can get us there, and agrees to be a part of the win, graduate, do it right principle and philosophy.
How do you get Iowa high schools incorporated in this?
Incorporated in this.
In terms of having the sport?
Well, Iowa high schools have 600 students already that are, and then the Iowa High School Association has their rules about how many sports have to sponsor. And my understanding is it's not that far apart, but it'll be up to them to get it officially sanctioned. But until that point, already just having 600 girls that are participating is a great start. And having the championship that was held here, that has been held here, I've not been to it personally, but I've received feedback from Tom and from Barbara and others that it's been incredibly successful.
Any other questions for Gary? We'll bring Tom back up. Go ahead.
What do you think this means for girls across the state and across the country and for the sport more broadly?
Well, anytime there's advancement, I've been doing this for 33 years. I certainly have watched and been a part of the growth of women's sport. Most recently, my daughter, watching her play in high school as she was going through that process, but going all the way back to, I was a student athlete in the early 1980s, and just watching the growth of sports for girls and sports at the highest level all the way up to the Olympics has been amazing. And I think this is just another really positive step in that direction. And as Tom mentioned, for us to be the very first university at the Power 5 level to add women's wrestling, I just feel great to be a leader in that area.
All right.
All right?
Coach Brandt, if you can come back up, we'll questions for a coach.
This is a big deal. You've been around a long time. At what point did you not say fell in love with women's wrestling, but made you take notice?
This isn't Tom Brand's, this is Iowa Hawkeye Wrestling that backs this. Terry Brands is in my ear. I could say, hey, it's about time, jokingly. But there's a lot of reasons why you do it, and those reasons are because they're just as hungry as these guys are to win championships. There's no separation. And the hunger and the desire and the drive, and now you get to do it at institution where other big-time institutions are going to follow, and we're the trailblazer. Awesome. We've been the trailblazer before. We have the first black national champion, Simon Roberts. That's important. And it's not, oh, they get their chance now. It's they are going to be going to school to enjoy the goods of college life, which is the do it right part. You know, they're going to be going to a big-time college to get a degree. That's a graduate part. And they're going to be going to a program that is going to have the best facilities and the best coaching and the best environment, the best fan base. And that's the win part. So this isn't Tom Brandt's being on board. This is what you do.
I asked Gary about talking to other schools. Have you talked to any other coaches who might want to push their programs to do the same thing?
I think that there's several that are close without speaking for them.
Tom, you've seen plenty of women's wrestling. In fact, right here in this arena. What has it done? What have you seen? I mean, just the effect.
Well, you talk about trailblazers and you think about Tricia McNaughton, Tricia Saunders, married Townsend Saunders. And you hear the stories of Zeke Jones, who trained with her as a kid. Zeke Jones is a head coach at Arizona State. He's a world medalist. He's a world champion. He's an Olympic silver. He wrestled at Arizona State for Bobby Douglas. Tricia McNaughton was one of his training partners, and that was in the 80s. So here you have a trailblazer, and so, I'm not answering your question on what it means or necessarily, but you see that it's always been there. Just because we're doing it now doesn't mean that all of a sudden they're ready for it. They've been ready for it just like men have been ready for it. And that's how I look at things. Most always.
Tom, what does this mean for the sport? Because it wasn't that long ago when the Olympics tried to drop wrestling, and now here you are standing up where a major university is adding the sport. How does this help the sport at all, and what's kind of been your full circle thought process going from that low moment to this moment?
Yeah, a lot of things happened why wrestling went that way, and we got rid of those reasons. We got leadership in, at the time it was FILA, and now it's UWW, where the leadership is strong, and the leadership is actually doing some things that actually make wrestling more exciting for television, for fans. You've seen it go back to kind of where it needed to be with the rules. In the timing and so on and so forth. It is an exciting format now. So because it was dropped from the Olympic program, it's probably the best thing that happened to get the format to back to where it was exciting for fans and television and so on and so forth. And then the other thing that goes along with that is, you look at women's wrestling at the collegiate level is freestyle. And that's exciting. And that's not me endorsing freestyle changing men's wrestling. We got the best gig in wrestling. We have a sold-out, 6-session, 3-day tournament that over 100,000 people attend. Collegiate wrestling is strong. There's not an argument to go to freestyle. I'm not saying that. Women need to run their own show and make their own decisions. I'm on a board for one reason, because there's some unreasonable people that come in with opinions to try to strong-arm what these women need. When you have Terry Steiner, who knows what he needs. He's a head coach and doing a great job, and in fact had the best tournament for the women's Olympic team in the history. And the history isn't that long, but the trend is going this way. He knows what format needs to be there. And Sally Roberts and, the emerging sport status people and that committee on women's athletics and the NCAA, they know what's best. And if they decide to change, then they change. But my job to be on that board is to not be a yes man, but to back up what common sense says is already working. And you look at the trend of women, you talk about it locally in numbers and in all the fanfare, and Josh Schamberger, all the things that he's done in this community with his team. Awesome, awesome. But look also at the success at the highest level. Look at the success of cadet and junior age division in the United States. And then look at how that transcends into the Olympic level. So that's a strong statement for why you do this. And I'm telling you, the University of Iowa, like it is for our men, you're looking at some guys over there that have already won some international world championships age group wise, and you're looking to some others that aspire to that senior level. And like our men, that women's program will be funded in that RTC/international arena.
Tom, regarding the future coach for women's team, what recommendations will you make to Gary, and does it need to be a woman?
I'm not making any recommendations. I'm in collaboration, or I'm in concert with Barbara and Gary, and we will make decisions as we go forward. Gary said it best as we were walking in here. This is the first step of many, and it's exciting now, but man, look out, because I'm telling you, the next steps are really, really exciting. This is actually dull for me. So this is exciting, but the next steps are more exciting.
With the growth of high school wrestling for females over the last 3 years, how much more help would that be for the program if the sport was sanctioned at the high school level?
I think in the state of Iowa, it's a no-brainer. I know there's people in this room that are working hard. I think, let's not skirt the issue. There's a little squabble going on, and who's going to own it? Which organization? Get over that squabble. Somebody just, partner up, and let's get some common sense here, and let's get a doggone sanctioned high school tournament for these girls. They've earned it enough, and doggone it, they need it. And we need it. I need it. Schamberger needs it. Go put that thing in that new arena over there. That's where I would go with that. Just do it. Come on. Let's get together and do it. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate you being here today.